Hello and welcome to episode 13, unlucky for some, of the Primary Maths podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm Jon Cripwell.
And I'm Becky Brown.
Hi Becky, how are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you. Very excited for episode 13, Jon. As you know, that's my favourite number, so I think this is going to be a good episode.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, I forgot it was your favourite number actually, but we did do a whole maths of life around the number 13 and why it might be considered unlucky. Can't remember which episode it was, but I will dig it out and put it in the show notes for anybody that's interested. So I've had a good week. I've been back up to Twinkl HQ again on Tuesday earlier this week, and met up with a few of our colleagues there, which was great, and recorded a 2-minute intro video with one of the other national education leads, Michelle Windridge, who is the national education lead for EYFS in schools. And as a company, we're putting together a Leading With podcast, which will be great. Not as entertaining as this podcast, Becky, obviously.
Of course.
But I have been asked to do a couple of episodes on that as well. So I've been working on that too. And it's great that we're going to have lots of expert guests talking about all sorts of things in terms of leading within schools.
And you're a podcast expert these days, Jon.
And I am the resident podcast expert, it appears. So we were asked to put together a little trailer for that, about a 90-second trailer. Can you guess how long it took us, Becky? Knowing what a consummate professional I am and how quickly we record these episodes, guess how long it took us to record a 90-second trailer?
Well, I mean, I think we've got it down to a fine art now, Jon. I don't think there'd be too many outtakes from the Primary Maths podcast. I mean, there probably are. You're the one doing the editing, so you see it more than I do. Right, 90 seconds. I think probably half an hour.
Half an hour for a 90-second trailer. I mean, that would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? However, it actually took us about 50 minutes, most of which was spent laughing, some of which was spent trying not to laugh, and a tiny bit of which was spent actually saying the words that were on the whiteboard behind the camera that we were supposed to read. For a small fee, I will share those outtakes with you, and you can laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. It was one of those things where, it was one of those things where you're corpsing. It's called, isn't it? You're laughing for no particular reason, but once you've started, it is impossible to stop, and anything will set one of the two of you off. And it was painful, but also very, very funny. So look out for that. I'll share it with you at some point.
I'm sure it will come across that you're having a lot of fun in your trailer as well, Jon. You got there in the end.
I mean, the trailer will be very serious because... No, it won't. No, the trailer's great as well. But the podcast is going to be great. It's not just me. It's all the other national education leads as well, talking about their particular areas of expertise and things. And I think it's going to be a great listen, whatever your subject matter might be. Of course, my episodes have focused on maths, as you would expect. And it's been great catching up with some people on there too. So,
sounds good.
What are we going... Oh, sorry, Becky. I would say, what have you been up to this week? Anything you want to share?
So it was the start of term for me this week. So I had a day in school. Haven't started work with a new class yet because we've been doing the usual sort of back to school inset.
No actual children at this point. No actual children in the class at this point. That would be
I get to look forward to that next week. I'm currently in the stage, that stage you get to where you wonder if you might have forgotten how to do it all before you've actually got back in front of a class of children. But actually really looking forward to seeing them on Monday. So that will be good.
That's great. And you'll be in the same boat. I know lots of teachers are already. We're recording this on the Friday before it goes out on the Tuesday. We're going out on Tuesday, the 9th of September. By which point, I think everybody will be back, won't they? Some people have been back a week already. So if that's you, I hope it's been a good week. So what are we going to be talking about in this episode, Becky? Because we're back with this episode with an interview, somebody else joining us today. So what's on the agenda?
So, in this episode, Jon, we're talking about the often tricky topic of transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. Why does it feel like pupils are treading mathematical water in Year 7? And what can we do as primary teachers and leaders to help make this important educational step an easier one to take?
Mathematical water. That could be a new brand for us. Yeah, we need to start the merchandising. Obviously, we're on episode 13 now. Mathematical water coming to a supermarket near you soon. We'll be right up there with Prime and whatever else. Anyway,
I'll be drinking it in the podcast next week. You'll be looking out at me taking a sip from a.
You watch. Make sure you watch us on YouTube next week. Mathematical water. It's the future. Yep, I was joined by Pete Mattock, a nationally respected maths educator, author, and the secondary version of my role here at Twinkl. He's the national education lead for secondary maths at Twinkl. So I thought, who better to rope in and talk about this? And it might sound strange, Becky, that we're talking about transition to Year 7 in September when the children are just transitioning into Year 6, potentially those children that we're going to be talking about. But I think, as you'll hear in the conversation, we're not really thinking about July. We're really thinking about what can be done in the year leading up to that monumental moment. And I know, as a dad whose daughter moved to Year 7 last year, she's now going into Year 8 on Monday. It's a huge step, and I don't think you can just leave it to those couple of visits that children have to their new secondary school in July. So I thought it was worthwhile us talking about it in September to really think about planning out the year ahead and how we can make a real difference. So in this episode, we talk about why the move from Year 6 to Year 7 in maths particularly can feel a bit like starting again. For anybody who's had children come back from Year 7 to visit the school again at summer fairs and things, every time I've spoken to them, I've asked them, obviously, because it's all I'm interested in, how they're getting on in maths. And quite often it feels like, as you said, they are treading that mathematical water trademark. And so we talk about why that might be the case and how it might affect people's confidence. We also talk about curriculum expectations and how those, alongside baseline tests and different approaches between schools, might contribute to the challenge, and also what stronger collaboration between primary and secondary teachers might look like and how it could help to transform that transition.
Yeah, lots of points come up in the interview today, Jon, I think that go a little bit even wider than transition, but certainly now is probably a good time to be thinking about it when you've got time to put things into place. Pete is knowledgeable, pragmatic, and able to give us an insight from a secondary point of view. So make sure you stick around for the debrief after the interview too, because there's lots for us to unpack.
Absolutely. So just before we jump into this week's Maths of Life, and I have a belter for you this week, Becky, but just a reminder that if you enjoy this show, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a follow or hit subscribe on whichever platform you happen to be listening or watching on. We do, Becky, as you know, put full episodes out on YouTube. So if you ever wonder what we look like, you might be pleasantly surprised or not. You can also obviously get in touch and drop us an email at primarymathspodcast@twinkl.co.uk if you would like to get in touch. We would certainly love to hear from you. So,
Jon, I'm very excited about your Maths of Life this week. I feel like you've got a good one to share.
Well, again, it's just something that I spotted and thought, that's fascinating. I'm going to share it with Becky and a few hundred listeners. So if, would you like me to go first this week, Becky? Are you that keen to hear what I've got to share?
I am. I'm intrigued, Jon. You go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to take you to another strange little corner of educational history this morning that you may not have come across before, although perhaps some of our more mature listeners, viewers may have. Everyone loves a sitcom, right, Becky? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
What's your favourite sitcom?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Friends still. So my classic go-to cheer me up sitcom.
Yeah. I can pretty much quote any episode of Friends, I reckon. But I'm also a massive fan of some of the more classic sitcoms as well, which I might talk about in a moment. And everybody loves a sitcom. Everybody obviously loves maths. So, in a feat of broadcasting genius that you just feel probably wouldn't see the light of day now, the BBC once created not just one, but two mathematical sitcoms.
Two?
Yep, you
Yes,
heard that
I mean,
right.
one
Yep.
would be a surprise, but yeah, okay.
These were for broadcasting school, so it was part of the BBC educational content. When
Was it one of those
teachers,
where the TV was wheeled into the hall?
yeah, Through the Dragon's Eye is the one that I recall from primary school, particularly, and Geordie Racer, of course,
Yes.
which was
Oh, I nearly burst into the theme tune then. We'll save that for another
it's
day.
always on the tip of my tongue. But everything you could ever want to know about racing pigeons for some reason in the Northeast. That was my educational landscape of the late 1980s, early 1990s. Anyway, this particular idea came from the 1970s. So perhaps when the BBC was at the peak of its comedy powers, having success with mainstream sitcoms like Open All Hours, Fawlty Towers, Porridge, Yes Minister, those sorts of things. And the result in the first instance was a show called Everyday Maths, which first aired in 1978. They created 14 episodes of this comedy with arithmetic. And it's a sitcom, so here's the sit part of the com. We had Gwen, who has to leave home, and she's worried about the two laziest men in Watford, the dad, Sam, played by Arthur English, and teenage Mike, played by Jack Wilde of Oliver fame. So he played the Artful Dodger in Oliver,
he did,
if you remember.
Yeah, it's one of my favourites.
I mean, obviously you'll remember him from this more than you will from Oliver, but yeah. So with Mum Gwen away, Sam and Mike have to fend for themselves, and obviously chaos ensues. And maths is the only thing that will keep them afloat. If they want to cook dinner, they'll need to measure ingredients. Want to catch a train, they better learn how to read a timetable. Don't miss that small print that says Saturdays accepted, because that would obviously have hilarious consequences. And it wasn't just it wasn't just slapstick. There were proper sitcom episodes that happened to weave in maths within them. So everyday problems were solved through arithmetic, percentages, and timetables, as I mentioned. One episode that I watched on YouTube, didn't intend to, just fell down this rabbit hole and lost 15 or 20 minutes of my life. But it was all about Mike wanting to buy an electric guitar and amp that he saw in a shop window. He sees the two prices. We get to sort of see inside Mike's head as he puts them into a column addition and adds them up, and he talks us through like any good teacher might, really explains his reasoning, which is excellent. And it does some mental arithmetic and realizes that he can't afford it. But the shop does offer credit with a 10% deposit, which he works out how much that 10% is, again explaining his reasoning at every step. So it's a fantastic model for talking through your problem solving skills. But the rest of the episode basically isn't particularly about maths. It's mostly about him trying to convince his dad, and then later the shopkeeper to give him credit. And obviously once he gets the guitar, more hilarity ensues. But people must have liked it, Becky, because Everyday Maths was repeated every year until 1983. And there was even talk of spinning it off into a mainstream BBC sitcom. But sadly, we were denied the chance to see Sam and Mike on primetime. But in 1983, the BBC decided to cash in on its previous success and created Maths Counts. And this time it was Uncle Bert, played by the brilliant Roy Kinnear. Now, he was Henry Salt. What was the boy's name? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Somebody Salt. Oh, Girl Salt.
Veruca
girl's
Salt.
name, wasn't it? Veruca Salt. So Roy Kinnear played her dad in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film, the one with Gene
Okay,
Wilder.
yeah, I can picture him now.
So you can picture him. So he had two teenagers, Wendy and Steve, who suddenly had to manage on their own. There's a running theme here. When mum goes out the picture for some reason, hilarious chaos ensues, because obviously dads and their children can't be trusted to get anything right in the 1970s or 1980s, or possibly the 2020s, who knows. So one episode had them wrestling with pay slips and percentages, another with dodgy salesmen and misleading graphs. It was very much the forerunner to Maths of Life, like cooking, shopping, wages, and planning journeys with punchlines.
I love that, Jon. I feel like I can see some maths sitcom writing in your future.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I may have to go over the pond though, because it's still something that is sort of happening in America, which I'll tell you about. But do you know what put paid to most of this? It was the national curriculum introduced in the late 80s. It pushed schools towards more outcome-based, bite-sized resources. And they also, I think the BBC realised that they were spending an awful lot of money on, The Artful Dodger and Veruca Salt's dad, and other actors. And that actually maybe it was easier to make a little animation or a talking head with whiteboard. So the math sitcoms of the 70s and 80s were no more. But in America, they had a TV show called Square One, which ran into the 80s, which had sort of sketch comedy and music videos with maths, which is amazing. And then more recently, and I've seen this on my TV that the girls were watching, but I didn't really think of it as a maths show. There's a show called Odd Squad, which is a children's series about young agents solving bizarre problems with maths and logic. Now, I was thinking, Becky, if you were going to cast somebody in a maths sitcom today, who might you get to play the hapless dad? Other than me, obviously. I was tempted to put Ramesh Ranganathan in that kind of role.
Yes,
because
he'd be brilliant.
Yeah, he was a maths teacher, obviously. He's also very cantankerous and just looks fed up with life anyway, doesn't he? So I think he'd be great in that kind of, if we're going to revive the maths sitcom, he could lead that. I thought about Dara O'Brien being sort of a recurring character as well, because he's got that kind of, he's got a maths degree for a start.
See, Jon, you've thought all this through. I feel like, honestly, you're just seconds away from starting that script.
I reckon there's a nostalgic cameo for Carol Vorderman coming in, maybe an eccentric neighbour kind of role for Carol Vorderman. Somebody who insists on working out the perimeter of everybody's garden. I don't know. But it's there. It's there. I think it could still work today. I'm happy to lead a campaign on bringing back a maths sitcom. Even if nothing else, there's a chance to put the kids in front of the TV for an hour or half an hour and let them do some maths while you can get on with some marking. There was what was the Maths Mansion? Was Maths Mansion? There was
I don't know.
Yeah, there was a quiz show that was a BBC education one in the 2000s. I think it was called Maths Mansion. I'm going to have to look that up. That was quite good. The children had to solve maths problems to be released from where they'd been kidnapped, hilariously, and held prisoner in a maths mansion. They had to, it was a bit like Nightmare, but with maths.
That is my favourite Nightmare. I'd be definitely up for reviving. Yeah, a maths-themed Nightmare. That would be good.
Nightmare's got to come back, hasn't it? But, I mean, we're straying away from sitcoms here, which is really what I'm passionate about. But, Nightmare would
Well, if any of those big names happen to be listening, Jon, they could get in touch. You could send them over a script. I could have a little extra role, start my screen career.
Yeah. I will find a role for you, Becky, for both of us. But happen to be listening. Of course, they're listening. Why wouldn't they be listening? Hello, Ramesh. Thank you for joining us again. And Dara, if you could stop emailing now, that'd be great. So that's that's my maths of life, as it were, maths of life in the 70s and 80s. Maths sitcoms, I think there's still a place in the world for those. How about yourself, Becky? Any maths in your life recently?
Well, I have had a little bit of maths in my life this week, John, but to be honest with you, after listening to your massive life story, I think I might save it for next week. I don't think I can
Save
follow
it for
that.
next week.
Yeah,
No,
I
save
will
it for
do.
next week. I think that's fair. And we've probably gone on too long about math sitcoms, but I fell down the rabbit hole. I ended up learning more than I ever needed to know about them, and then thought I have to share them. You can see them on YouTube. They are on YouTube and available to watch on there. And the BBC still has a everyday maths little mini website as well that you can have a look at as well if you are interested. So take a look.
Thanks, John. That's half an hour of my weekend gone now, at least, as I fall into that rabbit hole as well. But I look forward to it.
Please do. See who else you can spot on there that you vaguely recognise from films in the 70s and 80s.
Okay, so now it's time for this week's guest interview.
This week, we're tackling one of those perennial issues in maths education, the transition from primary to secondary. Every year, thousands of pupils walk through the door of their new school, carrying with them years of learning, representations, and sometimes misconceptions. And every year, secondary teachers are faced with the same challenge: how to pick up where primary left off without spending the whole of year 7 reteaching what's already been covered. It's a tricky balance, and one that's often complicated by feeder schools using different schemes, different pedagogies, and even different ways of representing the same ideas. So, how do we smooth the path for pupils and ensure that the maths they work so hard to build on in primary school doesn't get lost in translation? To help us unpick this, I've invited somebody who knows the secondary side of the story inside out. He's a teacher, a leader, a prolific speaker and article writer, and the author of several brilliant books on teaching mathematics, including Leading Maths, Visible Maths, and Conceptual Maths. My guest today is my colleague, Pete Mattock, our National Education Lead for Secondary Maths here at Twinkl, so the secondary version of me, and I'm delighted to have him on the show. Welcome, Pete.
Cheers, John. Yeah, really happy to be here and excited to get in and talk about the transition element between primary and secondary today.
Yeah, no, that's great. We were just saying before I started recording that I've been meaning to invite you on because you started here at Twinkl with us, June full time, something like that, was it?
Yeah, so June full time,
and we've been very lucky to have you with us. So I always ask Pete, whoever the guest is, I always ask them what their experience of maths was at school. Now I already know the answer to this, and I'm sure listeners can probably guess based upon your journey. But what was maths like for you at school? Was it a subject that you enjoyed? Can you remember maths at primary school, not just secondary? What was it like for you?
Yeah. So yes, I mean, I enjoyed maths at. I mean, I would say I'm not sure how much maths I did during either primary or secondary school. I did a lot of stuff, and I learned to do lots of things. But yeah, I loved maths at primary and at secondary. I was generally very good at it. We used to do. I remember in year 5 and 6, without the pressures of the year 4 multiplication times table check. We used to do that in year 5 and year 6, where we'd go up every day to our teacher one-on-one while the rest of the class was working on something. We'd run through the latest timetables. And by the end, I could go through them from 2 to 12 forwards, backwards, out of sync, and with divisions. So, it always came quite easily and quite naturally to me. But yeah, I mean, certainly at secondary, that until I got to A level, that was a bit more challenging then. And I think there's a bigger jump there that because I'd found it so easy, I wasn't as prepared for it. And that turned me off a little bit during the later year of A level and the start of the degree, even though I did go, I mean, I did eventually end up on a degree in maths, but yeah, I sort of rediscovered my love of it back at university, and that's what led me into the teaching of it eventually.
I think that's quite a common experience when people go on to do A-level maths. Now, I didn't do A-level maths. I scraped through my GCSE in maths with the help of a fantastic teacher, and a little bit of luck. So A-level maths was certainly not on the cards for me, but I think I definitely had friends who did A-level maths, and I think a lot of them found it was a completely different beast to what they'd been used to at secondary and certainly at primary in terms of maths. Why do you, without going into too much detail, obviously this is a primary maths podcast, but maths is maths, isn't it, Pete? Why is it so different at A level than
it is
earlier?
And I think it might be a little better now with the changes to GCSE and things, although that remains to be seen. But I think certainly at the time there was a lot of focus on being able, like I say, do a lot of stuff, being able to carry out lots of procedures, not so much emphasis on having to think your way through. I mean, I got as it was at the time, A star in maths, basically by being able to remember how to do lots of things. And when you get to A level, that's really not enough. Yes, there's stuff you've got to do, but there's also you've really got to understand certain things. And I think it's partly that, and partly simply that because the content was a level of difficulty, several levels of difficulty above, I was used to finding it very easy. And then when I stopped finding it very easy, I was like, well, I don't like this anymore. And we know, both you and I, John, know about the correlation, as it were, between success and motivation. If you feel like you're going to be good at something, then, and you feel like you are good at something, you feel confident that you're going to be able to do something, then you're more likely to crack on and do it. And then because my first real challenges with the subject came very late, I hadn't learned the behaviors for what to do when you find things difficult. And so I couldn't cope with it fundamentally.
That's very much why my career in Olympic rhythmic gymnastics never took off as well, Pete. So I can empathise with you there. It was interesting that you mentioned about you sort of alluded towards conceptual understanding being a point that was lacking maybe at primary and secondary up until A level, where it may have been relied upon a little bit more than just procedural knowledge. And certainly I think I got through my GCSE without having much conceptual understanding. It's all, most of that came through teaching it later, where I felt I had to understand it a bit more in order to be able to teach it. Do you think that's something that's changed then in recent years?
Well, I mean, I think partly that, with the work that's gone on in maths education in the last decade to look more at why, how kids can make sense of things and the sorts of things that teachers can do to support that, the work that the NCTM and the maths subs have done and things, I think helps. I think, for all the issues that it caused, the changes to curriculum in 2015 at secondary and at GCSE in particular, has shifted a bit the focus. You've got much more there's many more marks and much more emphasis placed on problem solving and reasoning and things like that. And the content demand, stepped up in 2015, first examined in 2017, but the content demand stepped up at that point, and it made it less of a jump for the content demand at secondary to the content demand at A level.
That makes sense. So just I've taken you off on a tangent already. I apologise. Listeners will know that that's not an uncommon thing. So you went to university, you did a maths degree. Did you always intend to teach after that, or was
well, I mean, I ended up on a maths degree. I started doing a physics degree and changed very early on from physics to maths because it was supposed to be theoretical physics, but they made me do lab in the first year, and I no, experimental physics is not my thing at all. So I switched that module for a maths module and ended up doing a maths degree, which was fine. And I did, my first year or two, I wasn't really sure where it was going. But in addition to that, I used to be in the Army Cadet Force as a child, and as a teenager. And while I was at uni, I went back and did some sort of adult instructing volunteering with them. and I found that I really, really enjoyed it. I found then that I really, really enjoyed it. And that prompted me to reflect on my experiences as an older senior cadet. And I found, reflecting on that, it was working with the younger ones the younger cadets that I enjoyed. And so I did the student associate scheme in my second year, because I did the second year twice at uni. That put me into schools, doing support work, supporting classes, teaching small groups. At the end, I actually got to teach a full lesson as well, and I loved it. And so it was around that time that I sort of said, yeah, actually, this is what I'm going to aim for. I'm going to aim to go and be a maths teacher.
And now left to obviously to join us at Twinkl as National Educational Lead for secondary maths. And I know there's lots of projects that you're working on that we probably can't go into at the moment, but exciting things under development that we're looking forward to sharing. But what I wanted to talk to you about really this morning was, or this afternoon, I should say, is that transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, because we know it's often a talking point amongst primary teachers and secondary teachers. As somebody who spent a lot of their career in Year 6, I'd often have pupils come back to us who'd gone off to secondary school. They'd come back in the summer to a summer fair or something, and we get chatting. And obviously they knew my passion was maths, so that we'd inevitably be talking about what maths was like at secondary school. And the feeling was quite often that they felt that they were recovering things, certainly in Year 7, that they'd already covered in Key Stage 2, not necessarily just Year 6, but Key Stage 2. So why do you think that move from Year 6 into Year 7 maths is particularly tricky, or seems to be particularly tricky? Speaking as a secondary teacher to perhaps primary teachers, primary SLT, who may be less familiar with secondary approaches and secondary maths.
It's an interesting one because it's a lot of change for children of that age when they're 11 years old, and they've been in a place for sort of 6-7 years, some of them, and they've grown through it, and then suddenly it's a different environment, but it's also a different approach to education. There's a lot of new things to learn, and for many, that's that brings with it its own anxiety, and then secondary teachers don't help, or secondary schools very often don't help that anxiety by firing tests at kids as soon as they get through the door. Baseline assessments, CAT assessments, and all the rest of it. And then as well, and it's always amazed me that some schemes of work for secondary seem to be set up to create an impression that maths is new and different, and actively not try and build on what has come before. They throw some bits of symbolic algebra, which I know is in the Year 6, but new bits of symbolic algebra at them as soon as they come in. It's the first unit they study, and it's like, I always thought, if I was sat there as a kid like that, thinking, oh my, and who'd been good at maths at primary school, I think, oh my God, even maths is different here.
Knocking them off balance as soon as they walk through the door.
Yeah, that's it. And then then what happens is that creates, of course, that sort of false impression for the secondary teachers of, oh my God, these kids can't do maths, and all the rest of it. And so then they sort of end up having to reteach a load or feel like they have to reteach a load of this stuff, where actually, if they just allowed a bit of space for kids to get comfortable, and it's something we'll talk about a little bit more, but sort of approached mathematics in the way that the primary schools and the upper primary schools approached it, so it felt familiar, it felt safe, they'd probably get the best out of them a lot more quickly.
It's interesting, isn't it? Just to touch on something that you mentioned briefly, I know from experience that a lot of secondary schools, as you say, impose their own baseline and CAT tests and things. And I can understand that maybe there's some distrust of the end of Key Stage 2 tests because there's a feeling, correctly in some cases, that many primary schools feel under pressure to teach to the test in those circumstances. But I don't really understand what the benefit of a separate test at the start of year 7 is. So maybe you could help me to understand that as a primary teacher.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can try and help you understand the mindset of it. I don't get it either, mate, to be honest. So, but I guess, I mean, there are a couple of things. I guess up until a few years ago, we used to get a real sort of question by question breakdown of the Key Stage 2 SATs. So, I could go online in August when I came back and sort of look at, okay, question 1, here's how these kids were doing. Question 2, here's how these kids were doing. Question 3, here's how these kids were doing. I'll start that again because of the door. Thank you, Molly. So I could look at, question 1, here's what these kids have done. Question 2, I could identify gaps. I could compare it to the question and see, actually, if there's a question that caused a lot of my kids issues, what did that question look like? So I could try and diagnose what those issues might be and stuff like that. You don't get the same now.
That's
you just
interesting.
Get
so we at primary, we still have though that question level analysis. So it'd be interesting to see why that isn't necessarily shared with secondary teachers.
Yeah. So I mean, certainly, last few years, as far as I was aware, the thing we get now is a sort of strand breakdown. So, number skills, geometry skills, things like that, which is not as much, but obviously, baseline tests predate all of that sort of thing anyway. And I know as a secondary school teacher, I have, put SATs data into target setting systems and things like that. And it's come out with targets that when you actually look at a kid's maths ability, it doesn't seem to marry up. It doesn't seem to chime at all. And so I think there are some schools that say, right, well, if we do this, we're in control of this. We know exactly what conditions this was done under. We know exactly what we want to check on. And so, that gives us supposedly more reliable data, despite the fact it's not nationally benchmarked and all the rest of it. And just to be clear, I don't have massive issue with baseline testing. I just think it's too early to do it in their first few weeks of school. You're not going to get, an accurate view while a kid is still juggling all this other stuff.
I know our early years colleagues share the same sort of concern, given the fact that they, at this time of year, as we're recording this, will be already thinking about baselining their children into reception in the first sort of 2 or 3 weeks of starting school, which just, again, maybe doesn't give that opportunity to settle in and actually feel confident and comfortable in the environment before you start delving into what they can and can't do. That idea of transition being a process and being,
and that's a national thing as well, isn't it? That data is actually going to be used to measure progress for later on, which is absolutely astounding.
I don't have an issue with trying to seek that data. It makes sense to have an idea of where the children are roughly when they start school. But again, there's probably better ways and times of doing it than the way that it's being done currently, in my opinion. Okay, so yeah, so moving on from that baseline testing, then baseline assessment, we know that happens in most secondary schools, and setting often takes place, or streaming takes place, based upon that. I've got my own feelings about setting and streaming, and we could do a whole other podcast about that, Pete. We won't go into it right now.
Let's just agree that streaming should get in the bin entirely.
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, I'm with you there. That's great. we can move on. So why then? Why is there this feeling that kids are retreading old ground in year 7? Because I know, again, speaking to some of them, not all of them, but some of them are less enthused by maths in year 7 because they feel like they're going over things that we've already done at primary.
Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer is because very often they are, and the sort of the larger question is why that feels necessary for a lot of secondary schools and secondary school teachers. And, I think part of that is a lack of confidence from both ends, actually, from the pupils and the teachers. We talked about, in the first few weeks and even, first month, first term, half term at least, my experience has always been that the year 7s tend to find their feet around November time. I don't know if that chimes with other maths teachers, but that's just my experience. So then the kids are not in a place where they feel confident to showcase all of their knowledge and skills to enter into the sort of rich discussions that I know they have in primary school when they're studying maths. There are new kids around them. They're not sure of their place in the pecking order like they were. They're not sure, they haven't formed those relationships with some of the kids that have come into them from elsewhere. They've not formed that.
Yeah, it's a different routine as well, isn't it? At primary, it could be that you're doing maths every day at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or whatever, and it's an hour long, and it's, you sat next to the person you sat next to, and you know what that looks like. So, transition, I can totally understand why that would throw some people off for a good few weeks.
But there's also that lack of confidence the other way from the teachers as well. And I think part of that is curriculum based. A book that I one of the things I do as well is I run the maths training for the local skip trainees, and one of the books that I always reference for them is Tony Gardner's Teaching Secondary Mathematics, which was published in 2014, and he highlights some of the areas where the Key Stage 2 curriculum, I think the way he says it is either that it's not this is definitely paraphrasing because this is not the right words, but not developmentally appropriate. So there are things that primary school teachers are being asked to work with these kids on mathematically that is not appropriate for the stage of development they're at, or ill-specified, as in, yes, it says do this, but actually, what does that look like? What does that mean? And the way it's sort of the stuff you've got to cover in there means that it's not going to be covered to the depth that kids are going to build a foundation with it. And he talks about, some of those being negative integer work or negative number work, fraction work, stuff like that. Things that most secondary teachers would sort of go, yeah, actually, the skills in there for some primary kids are shaky. And
I think most primary teachers would agree with you as well, Pete, to be fair. And obviously it's a conversation that's happening a lot at the moment in light of the curriculum and assessment review. There's a lot of hope that certainly the Key Stage 2 curriculum won't necessarily be dumbed down, but might be thinned out a little bit because of exactly what you're saying, that sort of age and stage appropriateness of the development of conceptual understanding for many children is a barrier, I would suggest, with the current curriculum at Key Stage 2.
We can hope, yeah. But I mean, I think what that leads to is a lack of confidence from teachers in actually feeling like they can build on what's come in primary school. And I was having this argument with somebody on social media recently, actually, when you've got a group of kids, 30 kids in front of you, all with different backgrounds, different gaps, different areas of maths they're strong in, different areas of maths they're weak in. Yes, you can try and build a curriculum that will plug all those gaps for all of those kids. But very often the safer thing to do is just say, right, well, let's just reset to here and go again from here and make sure everybody at least has this. But I think partnered with that, it is a fundamental lack of knowledge from secondary school teachers about actually what primary maths kids can do. Because you go into some of the year 6 classes. I'm a chair of governors for my local primary school as well, and you go into some of the maths classes in year 5, year 6, and the level of rich mathematical discussion, reasoning, and everything else. As a secondary maths teacher, you look at it and go, wow, but most secondary teachers don't get to experience that. So they don't have the knowledge that actually this is what kids are capable of. And if they knew that was what kids are capable of, I think they'd probably be able to raise their expectations for what they should be doing when they arrive a notch or two, accepting that time to get comfortable and familiar and everything else.
I think there's a couple of things there. Completely agree. It would be wonderful if we could build better links with secondary colleagues. And it's always tricky, isn't it? Because again, maths is just one subject. It's clearly the most important one, but it is only one subject. And therefore you would argue that you would want, links with English teachers and science and PE and music and art. And that's difficult to manage. But from my own limited experience of working with secondary colleagues, and I've worked with a few in my past role as a trust maths lead, that there is a lack of experience of recent primary maths. I would suggest, I think a lot of the experience of primary maths was from when those teachers were at school themselves. So that was something that I was interested in asking you about, was given that the work that has gone on in the last 10 years, since 2015 probably, do you think there's been and it's going to be hard to answer this, but do you think there's been a difference in the gaps coming up from before that point to after that point? Is there anything changing? Or is it still, you're seeing these huge gaps with 30 kids coming with, 10 different feeder schools and 10 different sets of gaps and 10 different, because I can imagine that must be a real challenge to try and approach. How do you, as you say, come up with a curriculum that hits all those gaps without reteaching everything? I don't know what the answer to that is. So is that improving, or is it as bad as it has ever been?
No, I think it is improving, and I think there's data out there that says it's improving. When you look at the international comparisons, year 5, things are moving on. Definitely, year 9, not so much. Moved on a little bit, maybe, but not at the same rate as year 5 have. So I definitely think it is improving, and I think what I've found is definitely improving is sort of that. I'll use the word fluency, although I'm not convinced it's all fluency. Certainly the sort of on that area between automaticity and fluency. It goes beyond automaticity. I'm not convinced it's full fluency. But that, knowledge, let's just call it knowledge and skill to keep it easier. That knowledge and skill with arithmetic and with, being able to carry out calculation and things like that. That's definitely, for a lot of primary school children or children coming into year 7, that's definitely stronger than it was. I think the bit that's still quite difficult is getting to grips with how that's been taught, and whether some primary schools doing an excellent job of building secure foundational models for kids to understand what these calculations are doing and why they do what they do, and rooted in a sort of concrete or representation, so that they actually can manipulate that mentally, if not physically, and make sense of it, or whether it's just come from get them to do this lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of times, I think that's the one that's perhaps still harder to unpick, because on the surface it can look quite similar. So I think that there is definitely some progress there, but you worry that I guess as a secondary practitioner you worry that yes, okay, they can do that, but does that mean they're going to have that flexible knowledge around it when I need it to do this and I need it to do that? And that's why, not, I wouldn't say the whole reason, but I think definitely a contributing factor to why secondary schools still feel the need to reinforce that and re-go over that to sort of make sure that it is flexible enough for their purposes.
Again, I could go off on a tangent and we could spend a whole episode, and we will do at some point, I would like to, going into conceptual understanding and representations and concrete pictorial abstract approaches. I know you've got some training coming up, some free to access training.
Yes, I've got Teach Meet coming up later this month on that, and then another related one sort of later in October, looking at forward-facing sort of approaches to mathematics as well. So the two will work, and then actually one in November about conceptual maths as well. So the three of them will work very much in tandem.
And I will definitely pick your brains about some of that as well, because not just from a secondary point of view, but I think it's great to have a conversation about conceptual understanding and things. So I can see that there would be potential pitfalls with schools that have used different schemes that might have varying representations in them, and children being familiar with different ways of representing certain ideas and things. And again, that might be a barrier when it comes to secondary teaching and trying to unpick or trying to pair up ideas with representations that children might be familiar with. Because in primary, we talk a lot about that journey and trying to keep those key representations the same all the way through. But there's definitely an idea that certain schemes use.
You might be giving secondary teachers a bit too much credit there, John, for some of them, because I don't think that the use of representation and concrete representations is as prevalent as it might be at secondary school. I think the flexibility there is more of the issue in terms of, can they just say this and do this, or do they really get it? And I think that's what concerns secondary teachers, secondary departments. And they're not so worried about, many of them anyway, not so worried about how do they think about this or how do they think about that. Is whether they feel they've got enough strength and depth to be able to use it this way, use it that way, use it the other way, recognize it here, recognize it there, but then they don't help with that by actually using those representations and that concrete apparatus to support that anyway. So
I mean, we'd all agree that we'd like them to be flexible and to be able to solve problems in various different ways with the knowledge and skills that they have. But to me, the better way of getting to that point is to have a deeper understanding of the structural the structures behind the maths that they're working with. And again, I would suggest, and I know that you would not disagree, that using concrete and pictorial representations for those things is critical. So we could do a whole other podcast on that, which again we might do at some point. Lining up for about 15 of these, Pete, I'm afraid. But and what I'm conscious of, that I don't want to pit secondary teachers against primary teachers. We're all working towards a common goal, hopefully. So we've identified some of the issues. What might the solution look like, do you think, in an ideal world? Let's say we start with a new curriculum in 18 months' time that is a little leaner at Key Stage 2, a little clearer in terms of what the minimum expectation is for the end of Year 6, how can we then make that transition really purposeful between year 6 and year 7 so that kids are feeling motivated and enthusiastic about maths in year 7 and feel like they're learning new things, and teachers can feel confident that they know, what these gaps are, if there are any, and what they need to do next.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the keys for that would be first of all, starting early with that information sharing. We've talked about visiting, which I think would be absolutely brilliant. And we say yes, you've also got English and you've got this, and you're right. There are other subjects there, but for maths, being that it's not completely hierarchical, sorry, but there are prerequisites that absolutely must be in place. I think there's more of an argument that for maths getting sort of the lion's share of that than other subjects, just because of the nature of the subject. I mean, of course, I'm going to say that because I'm a maths teacher and maths leader, but I think there are objective reasons why that might be the case. So I think there really should be some visiting going on by teachers of maths at secondary schools into the primaries that feed to them, so that they can actually see, this is the level of maths that these kids are capable of. And following that up with sort of ongoing discussions between the maths leads. I was lucky enough, actually, that in the school I left earlier this calendar year, that our numeracy coordinator, we had a TLR position in the department, numeracy coordinator, actually was part of a group with the maths leads in the primary schools. And so he maintained that constant dialogue with them and was able to bring things back into the department and stuff like that, which was really, really good. I'd also argue, I think, for more transition in June and July. There's plenty to be doing in between in terms of information sharing and visiting and discussion. But I think, by the time you get to when SATs finish towards the end of May, GCSEs finished by mid-June, most primary to secondary transition, the direct come and visit for most kids is 2 days. And I know that in primary schools, they fill that time with lots of enrichment and trips and stuff like that. But I think that there's time enough there that you could actually come, bring kids to the secondary school for longer with their primary teachers. I think that would be brilliant, with their year 6 teachers, and spend some more time immersed in the different subject areas at the school, working on mathematics with the primary teacher and the secondary teacher there. If secondary schools managed to get their timetables sorted, I was the timetabler for my school for the last few years, and barring any major catastrophes, my timetable was generally sorted or in a good enough state that we'd know which teachers were teaching what by the time GCSEs ended. And so, if secondary schools can do that, then there's a perfect window of opportunity there for some real cross-phase teaching going on in that period, which I think would be fantastic. And it would also allow you to actually then go, okay, so now we really can see that these kids have these gaps and these gaps and these gaps, and we can plan for that for when they come to us in September. So we don't need a curriculum that's going to fit, or we can, deal with some of that through a well-designed starting curriculum, a transition curriculum, if you like. And then we can deal with the rest of it through small group intervention, one-on-one intervention, whatever else. But given the time to sort of figure that out cross phase with the input of the primary school, the year 6 teacher, as well as the secondary school teacher, I think would be brilliant. I'd like to see that sharing then carry on in September as well. That's more difficult because obviously the year 6 teachers will have picked up their new classes and everything else there. But I think you could do that through teacher swapping if needs be, get one of the secondary colleagues to go into the primary school and cover an afternoon so that the primary school teacher could come up to the secondary school and look at the kids now that they're settled in and help and support and things like that.
I
And
think
also
everything that you're sort of angling towards here, Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, though, in some form or another is a more close working relationship between the primary school and the secondary school and the maths teacher and the year 6 teacher, involving the children as well. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation actually with you in September, is to try and give leaders and teachers time to think about these things as we go through the year, because we know how busy school life gets. So, an opportunity, if you're writing your action plan, if you're a primary maths lead and you're writing your action plan at the moment, is there an opportunity to work more closely with a couple of your main secondary schools that you send kids off to build that closer relationship over this year? Because I can see there's logistical issues potentially if you've got, say, my last class. I think I had 6 secondary schools that the children went to. Predominantly, they went to one of 2, but within the class there was, certainly another 4 or 5 schools that the children would have gone off to. So
that's the same both ways round, isn't it? My last school, we must have pulled in from nearing double figures in terms of kids that came to us. Predominantly it was from there was a big 3, and if you can't do it with everybody, at least you can do it with them.
That's what I'm thinking, is that and I think there has been, certainly in Derby where I'm based, we now have 3 transition days rather than the 2, which is better. Still could be more. I think it is.
It, though. You could treble it.
Yeah. What I mean is, yeah, you could. And interestingly, at my wife's school, which is a primary school, they, for the last 2 weeks of the summer term, they do exactly that within their school. They roll over all the classes within their school for the last 2 weeks so that you get to know the children before that sort of starting point in year 6, in September. So closer working relationships between primary and secondary, completely wholeheartedly support that. Yeah. Any other ideas?
It still comes under the vein of closer relationship, I think. But I think one opportunity that's often missed out on is information going back the other way. So actually, one of the things that I, like to get my, the maths numeracy lead at my previous school to do was to sort of find what kids were finding difficult in year 7 and feed that back to the primary schools and say, actually, we're finding that kids are coming to us, we're insecure here, insecure here, insecure here. Is there anything you could do about that to stop that happening? And I think that's a very big missed opportunity in a lot of places, is that you get all the transition information in June coming this way for the school, but you don't get anything coming back that way when the kids are towards the end of September.
That is a fantastic point. I think in 15 years of teaching year 6, I never had a single piece of feedback from a secondary colleague. Whether that was because they were being polite, I don't know. Whether it was just because all the children I sent up were absolutely 100% where they were supposed to be. But never did we get any feedback from that point of view. Even, the following year when we saw the same transition coordinators again, it was always one-way traffic in terms of that feedback.
But that's it as well. You had a transition coordinator, same one, which was whole school. Secondary schools need to distill that down a little bit and have that relationship going between. I mean, it's trickier because obviously primary school, you might be leading 3 or 4 subjects and therefore trying to have conversations with 3 or 4 subject leads at secondary school. But even if you don't do it for every subject, even if you just do it for the big 3, your core subjects, having that connection directly rather than having to everything funnel through this one person who may or may not have any idea about the information that we could be talking to each other about in terms of mathematics. If it was you and me, me and the secondary school lead and you and the primary school lead, if we had that direct connection, it would solve so many, many problems.
Wouldn't it be great if I knew as the year 6 teacher or even the year 5 teacher what you were going to be covering in year 7, so that I could have an eye on that, not just from a maths point of view, but in history, in English, so that we're not covering the same text, so we're not going over the same things. That'd be great, wouldn't it? But it seems that there's very little information sharing that goes on in that way, which is frustrating and ultimately makes it harder for the children in terms of transition as well. So yeah, totally agree. And you would think most secondary schools would be open to that kind of creative relationship. I'm sure primaries would.
You would hope so, yeah. I think it's going to take somebody, and I'm not sure. I mean, there probably are examples of excellent practice out there. I mean, I've seen some examples of good practice, innovative thinking, but it's going to probably take somebody to go, actually, this is really what it should look like, whether that's government, whether that's someone like the NCTM, and, they've got some good stuff going on with the 5 to 8 continuity projects across most of the maths hubs and stuff like that. But I think it's going to take somebody actually being able to highlight, this is what everybody really should be striving for. And you don't see that in the same way as you do other areas of maths or school life. There's various statutory and non-statutory things for a lot of what schools have to do. Not so much of that in the transition vein.
No.
At all.
No. We are running out of time. We've run over time, Pete. Thank you so much for your thoughts this afternoon. Lots and lots to think about. If you are one of those schools where you feel that you've got transition working really, really well, I know that both of us would be really interested to hear from you. And if you've been part of that 5 to 8 transition work groups and things, and you feel that you've got something that's working well from that as well, again, we'd love to hear from it, because it's something I think we're both keen to see how we can help with as well. Pete, thank you very much for your time. If people want to find out more about you, obviously they can read your amazing books. I'm sure you'll have a 4th one in the works at some point. But other than that, people can find you on LinkedIn, of course.
They can. Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do actually is to hit my website, because everything pretty much is on there. So my website is visiblemaths.co.uk, and if you're not sure why that is, it will become clear when you go there. And yeah, you can find out pretty much everything and anything about me from there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Pete, and we'll speak again soon.
Cheers, John. Really enjoyed being here. Thank you for having me.
Huge thanks again to Pete for joining us and sharing so many great ideas about how we can help to manage Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 transition. And to be honest, Becky, I was thinking while we were recording that a lot of these ideas would be a benefit whatever the transition stage, whether it's from EYFS through to year 1, or from just year 2 into year 3, or year 3 into year 4. Wherever you're thinking about transition, I think lots of these ideas might come into play. But there is something particularly challenging about children transitioning to a completely different environment, isn't there? And completely different setting, completely different school.
Yeah, I agree, John. I think my biggest takeaway from listening to Pete was I was sort of comparing it a little bit to children when they start school in EYFS. I was thinking about what Pete was saying, and you were talking about how when you go to secondary school, children are coming from so many different starting points. If you're transitioning between year groups, okay, the transition from year 2 and 3 to 3 might be a bit difficult if you're in infant and junior school. But if you're transitioning to another year group, you tend to know where they've come from. They've probably come from the same school. You know what's happened. But you don't really know that. You could have children in a year 7 maths class from 9, 10, maybe more different schools. And I was thinking how actually you can compare that to children starting school back at the beginning. And then I thought about the preparation that goes into that, and things like home visits. And we were lucky enough to have 6 weeks of an afternoon each week in school with our children before they started Year R, and how actually so much time is taken to really get to know the children's starting points, and you miss that really before they go into Year 7. I know there's a big time constraint, and I know that maths isn't the only subject, but Year 7 teachers having that time and it being expected that they had that time to go into the Year 6 environment and to try to bridge that gap a bit better.
Yeah, I think there is a huge opportunity to work more closely with secondary schools. Again, I completely, having worked in Year 6 for many years, I totally understand the time pressures. Where do you find the time to do these things? But I think there's probably, as Pete mentioned, chances to ease that time pressure a little bit by working more closely together, by helping each other out, whether that is a teacher coming from secondary to work with the children for an hour, or whether there's another solution using other members of staff. I'm not sure, but I do think that the benefits of doing that would be huge. Where I can see the struggle is thinking about how many different schools some secondary schools might have to visit to make that work. But when I think about my last Year 6 cohort, I would say 80% of them went to one of two secondary schools. The other 20% were sort of split across lots of different ones. And maybe, I know you don't want to dismiss that 20%, but if they would also benefit, wouldn't they, from the input from the other two secondary schools, perhaps, just in terms of getting used to what a typical secondary school might look like, or what secondary maths might look like, particularly. But it is a huge change, going from having an hour of maths every day, or an hour and 10 minutes of maths every day with the same teacher who knows you and can pick up little bits in the afternoon, or make some cross-curricular links to maths in other lessons and things. Going from that to maybe only seeing a maths teacher 2 or 3 times a week, I distinctly remember having double maths on a Friday afternoon in one of my years at secondary school. So that would have been 2 out of my 4 maths lessons for that week, just on a Friday afternoon, and probably wasn't the most purposeful use of time. So it's a huge change. I think Pete was very good at identifying where secondary teachers could help out with that transition. But I do think that as primary teachers, we can also take a lead in making those links and trying to build those connections.
Yeah, I think certainly, quite lucky in some ways in Year 6 that once the SATs are done, you have time that you can invest in maths lessons, in thinking about what maths might look like at secondary and how it might be different. What else would you suggest, Jon? What do you think Year 6 teachers could do to try to support that better transition?
Well, I just think reaching out at this time of year, where things are busy in September, but we know that they only get busier as the year goes on until after May, at which point you are sometimes blessed with a little more time, although I always found June and July to be quite stressful as a Year 6 teacher as well, maybe because of that lack of structure that you might have had prior to that, but also just the number of things that landed, like leavers services, sports days, trips, residentials, children going off to sporting activities, but not all of them going off to those sporting activities. So then trying to, fill those gaps and things was tricky. Mm-hmm. So even though I know this is a busy time of year, I do think it's a great opportunity to reach out to whoever might be the head of department at the schools that your children tend to go to, and begin to build those links if you don't already have them, and see what opportunities there are throughout the year to invite secondary teachers in to see what maths lessons look like in your school, and begin to understand what a secondary maths lesson or scheme of work might look like. Because I'll be honest, I didn't know that much about the Key Stage 3 curriculum really, as a Year 6 teacher, and I might have benefited from knowing a little bit more about that. So I think it would be great if those conversations began to happen a little earlier. I really do think it would ultimately help support children in those transitions. And you would hope that secondary schools would be open to having those conversations too, and willing to see the benefits in creating a bit more of a partnership.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you were teaching Year 6, and I haven't for a while, but I did for a long time,
Yeah, you
I
escaped.
feel the same.
I don't know how you did that.
I know. Moved schools, John.
We could do a whole episode, Becky, on how you get out of Year 6 once you're there.
Run.
Move schools. That's the solution.
I loved teaching Year 6. I did enjoy it, although it comes with its own challenges. But I do think now I've had the luxury of doing some tutoring with Key Stage 3, and I know much more now about the Key Stage 3 curriculum. And I think you're right. Actually, it probably would have changed my teaching a little bit if I sort of knew where they were going to afterwards. So I think being able to be a bit more familiar with what comes next. We're always talking about it lower down the school, aren't we? You know where they've come from, you know where they're going to, but you don't always necessarily know what's going to happen in Year 7. So a better knowledge of that, I think, would definitely help.
If anybody out there is listening and feels like they've really nailed transition and what that looks like between their primary and secondary schools for those Year 6 pupils, we would love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you, but it would be great just to see how that works in practice, really. If you feel that you have a really great relationship with the school that you send your children off to, it would be wonderful to hear from you. So please do get in touch. You can find us on social media, particularly on LinkedIn. You can find me, John Cripwell, or Becky Brown on there. Or you can email us again at primarymathspodcast@twinkl.co.uk. I think that's just about it for this episode, Becky. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
If you've enjoyed the show today, please do share it with a colleague. And you can also leave us a rating or a review, which will help new listeners to find our podcast.
We'll be back next Tuesday, as ever, on the Primary Maths Podcast.
Until then, thank you again for listening and have a great week in school.
See you next time.